First of all, I would like to welcome you to HR Speak and thank you for accepting our invite.
Thank you so much, Zubin. It's been a pleasure.
So, let us start off, and I'm going to first do a short introduction from my end, and then I'll come to you for an introduction from your end as well, Preeti. So, immediately, what I can tell you right now is Preeti is the global head of talent management and leadership development in Lupin, and she has worked in organizations like CIPLA, where she was heading the Leadership Academy, Mondelez International, which was previously Cadbury India, Wrigley, Lionbridge, and a couple of decades of experience. And again, the common thing, Preeti, which I have noticed in my guests till now is what I show here on this screen. The the number of licenses and certifications that I find in LinkedIn, and I just go through the profile, I see what you've gone through, and it just shows the interest in learning. And this is something I always reach out. There are a lot of youngsters who are there in this particular session as well, and I keep telling everyone that if you see the common aspect of people who have reached a particular level in their careers is that they're great learners and they're always learning. And although I'm not going to read out all these licenses and certifications, but I
Please
really
don't.
love to show this to everyone. So,
It's embarrassing.
sorry, Preeti, we didn't get to you. The voice was breaking
I
for a
was
moment.
just saying, please don't read out. It'll be embarrassing.
No, that's all right. It's again, my objective is to encourage everyone to be a learner and to be a learner for life. So we will start off with this question. Perhaps the easiest question of the day is for you to introduce yourself professionally and personally. We really want to hear it from you. Professionally, I've shown everyone the designation, the position you hold right now. But then maybe something beyond that, so a little bit about who Preeti is, Preeti Bose is on a personal front as well.
Sure. Thank you, Zubin. First of all, it's a fantastic opportunity to connect with the fraternity, right? So I appreciate this opportunity. Working, like you said, working for about 23 odd years. Started my career as a teacher. I was teaching in the school immediately after my post-graduation in MA, which is my English literature. And then I realized that this is something I really enjoy. So all through my career, I think I've been in roles or been in situations where it's been a very quick touch with people with talent, right? So that's what I've been doing across different industries, different companies. But I think I've always taken choices, where the opportunity was to create something new. I don't think I'll do really well if I'm in a role where it is only maintenance or sustenance role. My desire is always to create something, make it sustainable, and then you probably move on to the new challenge, the next one. Professionally, worked across different industries, FMCG, so Wrigley and Mars and Cadbury, which was Mondelez. Again, fantastic experience there. Was in the global role, setting up the Learning University for about 120,000 colleagues, and we'll talk about that later during this as well. And then moved in pharma 3 years back. So worked with Silla. Now I'm with Lupin. I'm heading their talent management and leadership development. Personally, I like to write a lot. I published 2 of my short stories and poetry collection this year. I am also into fitness massively, and I think I got introduced to it very early on. I think way back in school, I was always on the track. I was always doing 100, 200, whether it badminton, volleyball, so different kind of sports, athletics. Always been interested in being fit, ensuring the people around me also try and stay fit. You can't influence everybody around you, and people are like, stop it. I don't want to have broccoli and salad, all the time, and that's perfectly fine with us as well. Apart from that, I think been engaged with a couple of NGOs. Most of them have been for child education and for women emancipation. And I think we'll discover more about me as we go on in the session. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Okay, okay. So, before I move on to my first formal question of the day, I just want to ask you something a little different on a personal front. So, how many cities have you been to? Do you have a count of the number of cities you've been to or countries, maybe?
Travel wise, I think I've traveled to over 25 odd countries. Cities, I don't have a count. But I love to travel, and most of the travel has been for or to places where there's been some historical or architectural value, or places where you can go sit by the riverside, be on your own. And I must mention that a lot of my travel has been solo travel, which means I just travel with a backpack and a very, very small suitcase that I can lug around in the cities on the covered streets of Europe. So that's how I like to travel. That's how I also learn, I think, quite a lot about myself and people, different cultures. But to answer your question, sorry, no, I don't really have a count of the cities I've been to.
Okay, all right. So you have traveled a lot, and I think that's one of the ways to learn about life, about cultures. I'm sure you've got a lot of learning from the travels as well.
That's true. Yeah. I think especially when you travel to a country, Zubin, where you don't know the language, and English to maybe French or Italian or whatever language, Croatian, only tells you as much, right? So our ability to manage your way, navigate through the metro system, just find your way back to the Airbnb, or just observe people, go into a restaurant, and experience that life and culture. There's a lot that one learns about oneself, and the exposure to different countries, cities, cultures, very, very important because we learn so much. And a lot of these learnings I bring back in my sessions, in the breakout sessions or activities, etc. It's always fun actually to just experience new things in life.
Right. So let me come to the first question in terms of the profession that you're part of, the career that you've had. So I will first focus on the last 5 years approximately of your journey. And this is my first question. Again, it's related to the kind of profile that you've had and the kind of experience that you've had. So, what are the fundamentals of devising the blueprint for talent management and succession planning? So, of course, there are so many things into it, but I thought let me ask you about the fundamentals.
Sure. Thank you, Zubin. And I think it's a very pertinent question. And I see really small organizations to large global organizations trying to get this right. And very few have actually gotten this right because even though there are tons of books out there and there are, different models, different frameworks that one can adapt, I'll touch upon a few things that I think are really important in trying to build a global talent management system and succession planning. Yeah. I think the first one is the intent of the leadership. Yeah, and it's very important that we figure out why do we need to have a talent management strategy? What are the business aspirations? How does and what are we trying to achieve? Where do we want to go as an organization? Once we understand the company vision, strategy, and the long-term plans, from there we come back to really what are the skills and capabilities that will take us there. What are the kind of people who will take us there? And what are the principles that we want to follow in the talent management philosophy. Second, I think most importantly is we are building talent for future, right? Succession planning is for future. Talent management is for future. Leadership development is for the future, right? So our plans cannot be short term. If there is a skill or capability gap, we would rather put those people in skill building program or other interventions. But for talent management, succession, and leadership, we need to have appetite for a long term horizon, right? We start investing in people today, and we can only see it over a period of time. Yeah. The third one is
Uh, I think there was some connection error on Preeti's part. So, Preeti, if you're there, we can't hear you. Um, just give me a moment.
Hello? I can hear you all.
Just give me a moment. I think there's something wrong with the network here.
Actually, and I can see Zubin and
Uh, Preeti, I think
hi.
we can hear you now.
Okay, fine. All right. Sorry. Just go back to the third point that I was making.
Right.
So the third is build versus the first one, of course, the intent and the organization strategy and plan. The second was building for tomorrow, right? Being futuristic. And the third one is a build versus buy. And we've heard this debate happen so many times. But actually, what are we building for? Do we really want to invest internally or externally? And a lot of people say that 70 to 30 is a good ratio to have, and people actually monitor this ratio over a period of time as well. The fourth one is what are the outcomes that you're looking for, right? Who are the kind of leaders that you're building? What you build. What is the kind of talent that you want 5 years, 10 years later? Yeah. And the other point is, I was talking to a couple of leaders last week, and they said very few management or a board will take a bet on people. So not many people want to bet. So we do the assessments, we do the competency mapping, all that we do. But if somebody doesn't perform well in the assessments, we just leave them be, right? But if your gut says, if your 20 years of leadership or 25 years of leadership instinct says, these are the people that we must bet on, we must go ahead and bet on them as well. The last one that I want to say is having an appetite for failure. So when you set up a talent management philosophy, a structure, one of the strong pillars is to give them the space to perform through a structured career progression and let them fail. Because if they don't fail, they won't learn. You can't put them in a cocoon and expect them to be absolute fantastic performers all through, right? So I think these are some of the few pillars that I think are important for building a long-term talent management philosophy.
Right. I really like the last point you said, and it's about failures. So if you do not allow people to fail, they would not learn as well. So I think being able to
Absolutely.
overcome challenges prepares you for bigger challenges in the future as well.
That's correct.
All right. So I'll move on to the next question right now. So this question is about, again, your experience and um, your experience in terms of leadership development programs. So, could you share your experience and ideas on creating a world class leadership development program? In fact, this is something a lot of people keep asking me about leadership development programs. So, I thought you would be the right person to give us an insight into this.
Sure. No, I think this is something which is very, very close to me and close to my heart. Some of the one of the areas that really get me very passionate. I think Zubin, I'll go back to the first intent about what are we trying to build as an organization, right? And it sits very closely to the talent philosophy that one would have at an organization level. Yeah. So, what are the skills and capabilities that we are looking to build in our leaders? There's this entire debate about nature versus nurture, and people do say that it is something people can cultivate, and I'm absolutely all for it. Uh, I just want to make a point here, and I don't know if it is very radical, but people have to showcase that little spark, right? So I will also give opportunities to people who raise their hand up and say, I want to do that. A lot of times leaders will not like to pick on somebody who's not even put their hand up for any risk assignment, any critical assignment, anything which is challenging, right? So entire this nature versus nurture debate again. The third is, does a board behave like a board? You know, does the leadership team behave like leaders, right? And what is the role modeling behavior that you see within the organization? So once all of these things are in place and you know the intent is there, the management genuinely wants to invest in building a leader for tomorrow, these are the certain behaviors and competencies. Once these basic things are mapped, Zubin, I think exposure. So I know the standard leadership development program would have a mix of classroom sessions over 6 to 9 months, projects, coaching, peer learning, learning from sometimes reverse mentoring, etc. You know, so it's a standard pattern people deliver or shell programs like this. And there's a lot of value that facilitators bring, and there's a lot of value that the management team brings by being invested in programs and genuinely taking interest in how people are doing, how participants are doing. I think one of the key things a lot of organizations don't do is give exposure to external environment. So if the leader, for example, in a lot of organizations is with them for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years and not had much external exposure and they have to be groomed to turn it right. So unless they have been brought in from outside, which means they would have some exposure. In the previous case, what we've seen is what they know is what they know, right? There's reluctance of stepping out, reluctance in learning new thoughts, and then they become siloed as leaders. So it's very important that as part of the entire intervention, we provide some sort of an exposure to the external world, maybe into a completely different industry, a different plant, help them engage with other industries, other leaders, some sort of cross-functional learnings. All of these are really important. Coaching, I think, plays a very, very important role in leadership development, right? Because we need that one person, if not more, somebody we can, somebody we can brainstorm with, somebody who guides us, somebody who is a mirror, right? And somebody with who we can be absolutely authentic and vulnerable. I've seen as leaders, we take it upon ourselves that I can't fail, people can't see me being vulnerable. I think being authentic and vulnerability go together, right? As leaders, if I have failed, I am absolutely okay to admit we messed up here. Because I remember one of my managers very long ago once mentioned that, you know, Preeti, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, that unless you fail to learn something from an experience, from a failure, that's no longer a failure, right? It becomes a learning moment, a coaching moment, a teachable moment. So that I think is very important for us to have that ability in us to admit that yes, we have not done our best, here's where I failed, and what can I learn from here? I think the next one is being ability to flex. So in leadership programs, it's a very cookie cutter sometimes. You know, you have class sessions, you have 30, 25, 30 people there, and everybody goes through a different format, and we end up comparing one person to another. But we have to remember that everybody's journey has a different start point, right? No two people, even though they are peers and meet at the same level, nobody has the same start point because they've been through different learning experiences, they have had different failures and successes. So what we should compare, if at all we compare, is point A of where that person started from and where that person is going now. Zubin, I lost you, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm having some bandwidth issues, so I just switched off the video. I hope my voice is clear.
It's fine. Perfectly fine, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
just saying, I'm just saying that it's very important for leaders for us to compare, if at all we are comparing, from where that person was at point A, where they started the leadership journey, and where they are now, right? And that's all that we should look at, right? Because the learning tracker that one should have should showcase their point of start, what they have learned, what they have failed at, what the successes have been, and what is the point B and where they do want to go as leaders. So some of the few things I think important in having a leadership development program, which are important to make it a success.
All right. Great. Thank you for sharing that. your ideas on this. I'm sure there are a lot of people taking notes right now. I already see a question in the chat box, but I want to come to that a little later, since it's
Sure.
also connected to the present situation. I feel, what we are facing at this point in time. But let me go to the next question. In
Sure.
terms of the virtual learning part, right now, of course, we are in a situation where most people are working from home, and uh, I'm also into learning and development. I've been into learning and development for a very long time, and as a person in this particular field, I've had my own challenges in terms of um, transforming learning into a virtual learning capability. Now, here, I would really love to know from you, in terms of your experience, in terms of your perspectives, what does it take to set up a global virtual learning capability or application? Why is a virtual learning setup very important? I mean, of course, at present, it is definitely something to consider. But overall, I would not only talk about this COVID-19 situation where we are locked up at home, I would talk about in general. Why is it important? What are the advantages of having this global virtual learning capability?
Sure. Thanks, Zubin. You brought up an instance for my previous organization, which is Mondelez, and I'm very proud of the fact of what we did there. So one of the key roles that I played, in 2014 end to 2016 sometime, is about 15 women, across the globe were chosen to set up a virtual university, which was Mondelez University. Yeah. And what happened was there was a study which we did, and we realized that a lot of dollar is being duplicated. People were spending money across the same programs. For example, a simple program like a project management had multiple versions, upwards of 40 different versions across different countries, right? And likewise for different topics like that. Yeah. So we realized that a lot of money is being duplicated, and dollars are absolute. It was an obscene amount of wastage of the corporate money. So we decided to set up a virtual university, and some of us were picked up, and we worked really incredibly hard to set that up. And we realized it's not very easy because the experience, that people's expectations of being in a classroom, the ability to hear your facilitators, the facilitator, etc. That convenience was being taken away at the cost of having a virtual university. But let me come back to this a little later and start from how did we actually set it up. So we started by identifying and working with the global capability leads across the business. For example, working with sales capability leads, marketing capability head, the supply chain capability head, and so on and so forth. So we had different meetings with different global capability leads to understand what are they looking to build in the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah. Once we had that idea, we zeroed in to say what really important to be done in the next 1 to 2 years, and what can we park in the next 3 to 4 years. So we did that segmentation of short-term, mid-term, and long-term planning and identification of needs. Likewise, we had conversations with the CHRO and capability heads for leadership, and we realized that there are 3 or 4 programs that are very important to build across the career chain, career stages for leaders, early managers, one for mid managers, one for senior managers, and one for the end of the value chain, which is people, leaders who are sitting right at the top of in the management, right? So once these needs were identified, and then there were separate needs that we did for technical functional as well. For example, supply chain, R&D, quality, etc. So technical functions. So these needs were also identified. There were different verticals established. Dedicated people were zoomed in, and what also happened was identification of technology background, because it was really important that we have a technology partner background who can help us establish all of this virtually, because there's a really large organization, over 1 lakh people globally, in over 70 countries. So important to have something which was consistent, common, and structured. So once this basic infrastructure, the blueprint was ready, then we started rolling out, conversations with different leaders across the globe, talking about what's coming their way, what is the Mondelez Virtual University will look like. Yeah, and all that happened, and it took us a bit of time. The conversation, because telling people that they no longer will be going into classroom, and we didn't take away all classroom, right? Because local countries had some of what they wanted to do, but about 90-95% of the entire learning shifted to the Mondelez University. Yeah. And after the conversations were over, because it was important for us to communicate what's coming their way, how can they leverage it, what will be useful, what's available to them, what are the skills and capabilities that we will build, and if there's anything that they need to do, where they should do. We tied up with another partner who would supply us with a lot of programs on soft skills and behavioral skills. So there's a huge repertoire of programs across different verticals, and once it went live, I can't tell you the number of the feedback that we got was amazing, because it worked really well then. And I realize even now that I'm talking 4 years later, that learning will never be the same for us, right? And we did shift back to a lot of classroom sessions, etc. But as I look at even in the COVID area or post COVID, what we look at, there will have to be a huge bunch of learning that needs to shift to virtual environment, right? Because it is important that the precautions are taken, and I don't know when we'll get back, and nobody has the answers, or when we'll go back to a stage where we'll be sitting in a classroom learning from it. And to make the most of what we have and not let go of this opportunity, I think it's going to be easier, Zubin and all, for the digital natives. So people who've been brought up in this age and environment, the millennials especially, and the Gen Zs, of being comfortable with technology and using smartphones and learning on the smartphones. It'll be slightly more difficult for people who've not been exposed to this kind of learning, and that's a separate challenge. And as organizations, we will have to factor in how do we bring in that side of the organization and those colleagues as well in mainstream, because whether we like it or not, a lot of learning has shifted to the virtual environment now. Yeah. And I do see it being the go-to mode whenever we want to pick up a new learning. And I know that a lot of you all, maybe on the call as well, go on to Udemy, go on to Coursera, go on to LinkedIn, Linda, etc. And I mean, learning is free a lot of times, right? People can just Google something and find out, unless you want to sit in a really structured internal intervention, which is for organization. Some of the benefits, Zubin, what you asked about being on the virtual mode or digital mode, one definitely is that saving of time and cost, right? So people have traveled from different parts of the country, and a lot of times for leadership development program in different parts of the world, right? So the amount of spend that we have on travel and accommodation, on facilitators being invited and hosted for a week or so, I mean, that's going to significantly come down. Yeah. The second one, the third one that I see is a sharp focus on the 70-20-10, right? And I'm sure we are all familiar with it, but just to reiterate, 70 is, of course, learning that we do on the job, right? Things and skills that we pick up on everyday role. 20 is, of course, learning from our peers, mentors, coaches, and 10% is a structured classroom session or reading or courses that we do on our own. So I do see that 90% of the learning that happens in the 70 and 20, there should be far more focus on what you and I are learning every day, right? Because I have heard leaders say, oh, I have not been put in a session, or the organization has not invested in me because there's no classroom session that I've been to, there's no program I've been to, I went to Harvard, I went to go to Columbia. And I'm like, there's a lot of learning that we can do in what we do every day, the 70%, how we engage, the challenges that are thrown at us. And I'm sure right now, the challenges of remote working, the challenges of engaging with colleagues without being face to face. I mean, we all learning how to navigate through all of that. Yeah. The next, and I think one of the last benefits that I can see is hopefully learning becoming far more manageable in terms of the content size and the bite size, right? So instead of having long 3-day classroom sessions or 7 classroom sessions or 5-day, I do anticipate that they'll become far more manageable in terms of time, and people can manage it at their own pace as well. Sorry for the long-winded answer, Zubin, but I hope this answers the question.
I think it does. In fact, I was also wondering, and this is a challenge that a lot of learning and development professionals are definitely facing at this point in time. Since you had the experience of setting up a global virtual learning capability, maybe I just wanted to ask one more aspect here. Now, in these trying times, if people are being kind of forced into a virtual learning setup. So in that sense, if I ask you, I do see there are L&D professionals who are attending the session right now. What could be the methodologies that uh, you know, according to your experience, that would work here? So is it only about, for example, I still remember years back when I used to work for a company called Tech Mahindra, and we had set up an e-learning capability. Uh, Even at that point in time, I was not very happy with the overall setup because I felt that the interaction with the audience has to be much more instead of kind of showing automated slides and maybe a few animations here and there. So, according to you, based on what are whatever facilities we have, the technology we have right now, what do you think could be methodologies that we could go for? Are there certain technologies that you would suggest that L&D professionals could use?
Sure, Zubin, and I think you've touched upon something incredibly important for us as learning professionals. Engagement with the learners is absolutely key, right? You can't expect, this is the difference between how children and andragogy and pedagogy, right? How children learn and how adults learn. So kids are put in a classroom, and now no longer even they have virtual sessions, but they are typically put in a classroom and expected to just sit there and take in whatever the teacher doles out at them. Vis-a-vis adults who we generally have a fair understanding of exactly where do we want to learn, what do we want to learn, what are the areas that will benefit us. So engagement with the participants, learners is critical, and how do we ensure that whether it is Zoom or Microsoft Teams, we generally it should invest in the advanced version of it because they do give us facilities like breakout rooms for separate, small table working like we had. There are a lot of examples. I know of somebody who is a marketeer and senior leader in one of the tech organizations, and we were having a chat, and they said even their marketing, a lot of the sessions that they do or the engagements with the agencies, etc., that they do of sharing the technology with the prospective clients has moved online, and it is more like an online marketplace where when the client center there is an like a digital goodie bag, and it could be anything from vouchers to etc. They're just being massively creative, and I was absolutely in awe of that when I heard it. So it's like you can go to a help desk, you can ask questions, you can engage with somebody. So the environment that they created, and they're trying to create, because even a budget for something like this is going up to $1 million or more, right? So while we do not want to invest all that money, but I'm sure we can be creative and learn from how different people are doing, uh, talking about the engagement, talking about how do they connect far more with the learners. So the different tools, Zubin, and I think rather than just being stuck with the basic version, we'll have to be creative in finding out whether we give a pre and a post, whether we engage with them in breakout rooms, whether we keep the learning really bite-sized, micro-sized, so that there's no fatigue of digital learning or online learning. And also, keeping in mind that learning styles of different learners, because not everybody is comfortable looking at a blank screen or video shots of people, and just learning from somebody who's talking like I'm doing right now. And I apologize for the long answers, but we have to manage the different learning styles. So if they can be built, they can be audio, they can be videos, they can be activities, things that are kinesthetic people can do. Maybe we can think of some activities or engagements that can be set up before the session is about to happen. And sky is the limit for creativity. And while we are in this situation, I'm sure all of us are being forced to think about what more, what next.
Right, absolutely. Now, I have a question in the chat box again, seems to be related to one of the discussions we're having just before this about leadership development. this question comes from Indranil Bhattacharya. So I'm kind of rephrasing it a little bit. So
Sure.
he's talked about two things. So based on what he was hearing you speak, so he's talking about leadership gut. I mean, more of gut feelings, and second is assessment centers. So I think you've already got the question, isn't it? So on the one hand, you have got these gut feelings. This is what should be done. That is what should be done. And on the other hand, you have these assessment centers. Now, where do you stand? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Are you going either way, or you have a balanced perspective here?
First of all, I'm Ranil. Hi, thanks for asking the question. And I can't tell you the number of times leaders have told me, I can figure out this person in 5 seconds. He is no talent, or he is absolute superstar. And I'm surprised because I've been in the business for about 20 odd years, right? And it typically takes me back to assessment centers to get data because I understand gut, I understand the instinct, right? But I don't think it makes for a very fair, objective, structured leadership intervention or talent management structure if we start taking these conversations on gut. There has to have some data, right? There has to be a multi-rater feedback coming in because if somebody likes you, you are high talent. If somebody doesn't like you, oh, they are fledgling. But it should be dependent on that one person's point of view or perspective, right? If the organization decides to invest in somebody as a talent, I think it is very, very critical to have a multi-rater view there. It is very, very important to have solid data that doesn't come out from just one inventory or one tool, one psychometric tool, but like a battery of them. And we can be prudent in not going after 5 or 10, but even if you handpick one or two or maximum three, and then you have the leader sitting and calibrating this, I think that is where I would sort of be. Of course, have data at the back end because nothing beats data, but also have leaders discuss their perspectives and their point of views. Yeah. So I would be in that balance there, Zubin and Indranil.
All right. Thank you for answering that question. I think you answered it very well in terms of. Now, that's what I was looking at. I've faced the same things in my career where people have this gut feelings, and I think that the challenge is primarily about perspectives and perceptions, right? When you go with gut feelings,
Yeah.
you would probably wear a set of colored glasses and somebody else wears another one. So it's always better to be logical and be data driven. Gut feelings are good, but should not be the final call, I guess.
No, I think you're right there, Zubin. And if I may just add something, so it is the same flight or flight, the instinct that we have in our amygdala, right? So when we are in a situation and we have to react in an instant, so that's where our gut or instinct comes into play. But when we are investing like thousands of dollars and lakhs of rupees in talent development, I think we should be far more prudent in how we are spending it. And I would always go back to data. I would always go back to a multi-rater feedback. I would also have a conversation about that person taking different points of view rather than depending on gut and biases.
Right. All right. So now we move out of the subject of discussion. We move a little bit about into your career, and we would love to know about the biggest challenge that you have faced in your career. How did you deal with it? Would be a good lesson for all of us.
Sure, Zubin, I think we all face challenge in terms of organizations every day, be it a relationship with the colleagues, peers, mentors, managers, organization policies, so those are hurdles that all of us deal with every day, right? But I think for me, challenge truly has been when I decided to move out on my own and become an entrepreneur, right? So that was, I think, it took me a few months, just having conversations with my managers, with my mentors, and the coach that I've had at that time, and actually figuring out how do I go about it, because from being in a brand like Mondelez, where I mean, even a child knows Cadbury, right? A 2-year-old child would say, "Where do you work?" And I would say Cadbury, and they would know. So from that phase where people love, and every time I said I work in Cadbury, it brought a smile to people's face, right? And Joy was one of the key elements of what Mondelez and Cadbury has meant to me. Very, very close relationships there. So getting out of that environment to completely jumping on my own, being an entrepreneur, and taking that plunge was one of the biggest challenges that I faced. But I must say that it hasn't been all easy, right? All the friends that you thought would help me, very few actually stood the test of time. In fact, friends of my friends and people I didn't know, they came up to me and, they offered programs. They reached out to me for programs. They reached out to me for coaching assignments, for long-term, short-term versions of intervention that they thought, and this was on getting the business part. I think something that I learned to do also is walk up to an excise department and talk to them about why I don't think I want to pay money to get my company registered, because somebody said you have to pay an X amount. And I walked up to that excise officer and I said, why do you want the money? And he said, no, I don't want the money. And I'm like, yeah, but your person sitting outside said you need X amount of money. So having conversations like these, and I did manage to get my company registered without paying a single paisa, and so on and so forth, right? So just trying to, and I realize the struggle people have in our infrastructure as well, right? Because there's every thing seems like a hoop, everything seems like a hurdle, because there are a lot many people trying to have different points of view there. You should do that, you shouldn't do that. And I went back to what I strongly believed in. Why did I start my organization in the first place? So, having that conviction, that faith in yourself, that what you're doing is in the right direction, that's very, very important. You will have challenges if you're breaking out on your own, like I had. I was on my own for the for a long time, for a few months, till there was enough business that I needed more people coming in. I hired people contractually. I engaged with different partners. I collaborated with other people who were doing business in the same areas. I reached, actually, one of the learning was that initially I was very hesitant of asking for help from anybody, and post that experience I realized that we all a society, we all a community, and just ask for help. Because if you don't ask for help, people will assume that you don't need any, and they won't offer anything. Only when we are vulnerable and accept that yes, I need help here, is when somebody would actually come up and say, you know what, I can help you in so and so manner. Does it work for you? So there were other challenges as well, but I think, Zubin, more or less, I go back to just finding my footing in the society where being an entrepreneur is not so easy. Being fighting the system, getting it established, building your client base, reaching out for work and business, ensuring that everything is as per the quality that you do. Because for me, perfectionism, unfortunately, is a value. And I say that unfortunately because I keep hearing that don't let perfection get in the way of your work. And I really believe that. But I also believe that till I have the time, and don't delay your deliverables, but till you have the time, until the work is on your desk, ensure that it's the best possible work that you're putting out for the next person in the line of the value chain. So that, again, ensuring that the quality is absolutely out there, and we don't compromise on timelines, we don't compromise on expectations. So I think more or less this is I did face a lot of other challenges in terms of getting the business running after a few months, because I realized that I can't do it all alone. I was absolutely overworked because the passion to carry through in the first few months was humongous, right? You're excited, you have high adrenaline, and you're absolutely gung ho, and you're working day in and day out. And before I realized, for the next 3-4 months, I didn't know when my day started, when my night ended. So that was another challenge. I didn't manage to work, carve out time for self-care as much then, right? But I realized that I need to very quickly hire help, and I was delayed in that. But I did, thankfully, hired people to help me. I reached out to others to, if I didn't know something, I reached out to people in different businesses. I reached out to strangers on LinkedIn. If somebody wanted me to develop a program on quality, and I didn't have that background, so while I had the expertise in designing a program, the technical expertise I didn't have. So I reached out to a few professionals in quality, people who are Six Sigma champions, who are quality heads in respective organizations. And so a lot of this learning happened, which I didn't anticipate in the beginning. So it wasn't easy, but I'm absolutely glad I did that because I am so much better, as an individual, as a professional, from all the learning that I had from that. So challenges, yes, but I think they've made me a better professional end of the day.
Right, right. I can definitely connect with you on that. Since 2010, I've been running my own training consulting firm, and one of the things I really connected with was the point on reaching out. In fact, when I started my firm, a lot of people asked me to reach out to smaller businesses, smaller companies. At that point in time, I was a one-man army, so there was
Mm.
nobody else with me. And then I decided not to follow the advice of people who were never into business. So I started contacting people I knew or even did not know. There were people I tried to contact, and you're absolutely right. Friends and then friends of friends. So friends or direct connections were not of much use at that point in time. They did not really support me as much. But then I started getting these big names on board in terms of acquisition of clients, and
Mm.
that's what surprised a lot of those advisors. And they asked me, how did you get these big names on board? And I said, I have a 50-50 chance theory. So it's very simple. If you do not ask, the default answer is no.
Yeah,
And if you ask, you have a 50-50 chance of yes or no, and I'm going to take that chance. I am not going to stop myself going and asking. And I think what I understand, perhaps you would also tell me if I'm thinking on the right path, is that when you have these kind of experiences, and there are a lot of shells that you break from where you were, and then you have to face these situations, and then whatever work you do post that, now as you rightly pointed out, you would be a much better professional because um, you've actually got better in so many other skills that you had not explored earlier while you were in a particular organization dealing with a particular function. Because here you are everyone. You're everything. You're the company, you're the marketing department, you're the sales, you're the finance, you're the HR, everything, right?
absolutely. And I think, Zubin, I 100% connect with what you're saying. That end of the day, it goes back to your conviction, and not just being an entrepreneur and everything that we do, right? The risk that we take, the chances that we take, it goes back to, are you convinced of what you're doing? And if you are, we eventually end up finding ways to make it happen. Yeah.
Right, right. All right, so the next question is about something good. Do you recollect a memorable moment or event in your career?
Uh, so again, I just joined Cadbury then, and I remember. So I was sent to ANZ Business Melbourne. They were having this a learning event. So me being in learning, of course, I also went to attend, and it was a 1 week learning event. And the team had worked incredibly hard for over months. It was a big team, and what they had done was, it was called Fuel, and what they had done was just gotten the entire country to come and attend different programs over a period of 1 week, 5 days. Yeah. So cross-functional programs, etc. The leaders were there, and I thought that was a huge platform to galvanize your workforce, to get people engaged and motivated. And I hadn't seen something like that before. So I was very, very excited, and how I do get excited about new things. I came back and told my manager, you know what, we should also do something like that. And she's like, you have a two-member team. I said, yeah, yes, but me and my team member will try and see what happen. And she's like, no, it won't work because they've taken months. They have had a lot of budget. This is the only amount that we have for the learning for the entire year. So I said, you know what, I'm going to pull the rest of the training calendar internally. I'm going to sit and design all the programs, and I'll work with other people who will design with me. But let's do this. And I took it up as a challenge. And she kept saying, we'll give you a month and a half, 45 days, and that's it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it will be a great learning experience. And so me and my team member, we made a plan. We reached out to different people. We reached out to the business internally on what capabilities, skills, programs they would like to see, and we made it happen. And it was fantastic. The India business Cadbury had never seen something like that. They were all energized, happy. The kind of feedback that we received was fantastic. I can't tell you the high that we had standing there at the end of fifth day, which was Friday, and I still have that performance appraisal from a manager, even though I've done bigger events, I've done bigger programs, and I've had much more better ratings as well. But that feedback appraisal, I still have it because she called out my resilience, she called out my tenacity and the perseverance, and the way she worded it, it was so touching, Zubin. And even when I think about it, I get goosebumps because we made something happen by absolute sheer hard work, conviction, and perseverance. And everybody told us won't happen. And now there's a very, very small thing in our business. But I think it just reinforces that belief that if we want to do something, we definitely can make it come alive. So that's something it's in my memory, Zubin. I'm every time I talk about it, I get excited and happy.
I can actually see that excitement. All right, good. In fact, so I think that's so entrepreneurial as well. Even before you jumped onto the entrepreneurial board, you already had that in you, because taking that kind of a risk, and when you mentioned the word tenacity, that's something which I think a lot of youngsters should learn to have, because we face these different challenging situations. But you had taken up the challenge by yourself.
Zubin, I think I am somebody who does take risks in life. I do take bold risks as well. I don't believe I don't know what's going to happen after this lifetime, right? Nobody knows that, and I do want to ensure that whatever I do, I can look back and feel really proud of what I've done and accomplished. So that's why I think I keep moving on from one thing to the next and keep looking at things that I've never done before, because that's something that gives me a lot of high and excitement.
Okay. So I'll move on to one more. Well, not one more. I have two more questions, but this is again one more question about you. What do you do when you're not working? I already heard traveling. So is that the one thing, or are there other things you do?
So I love to travel, like I said, and while I travel, I write quite a lot. So and I travel solo, so there's no dependency on other people wanting to see something and you being dragged somewhere you don't want to go. So it gives me absolute freedom and leeway on how I want to spend my time and where I want to be. So I travel, I write. I am a fitness enthusiast. So I remember I mentioned this at the start of the session as well today. But I'm a trained corporate athlete, which means, and it is an initiative by Johnson and Johnson. They run a company called HPI, which is Human Performance Institute, and it just says that as corporate, we being in the organization and corporate professionals, we don't take enough care of ourselves, right? And it just talks about a philosophy where if you look at the pyramid, imagine a pyramid, and the bottom of the pyramid is your physical well-being, and then your mental well-being and emotional well-being, right? So if we don't take care of our bodies, there's very little that we can accomplish in life, because athletes, elite athletes, they practice for 90% of the time for that 10% that they'll spend on the track, yeah, or on the field. And yet we are working sometimes 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and we don't take good care of ourselves. So that's something I'm very, very passionate about as well. And I am part of a few creative bodies, be it theater. I do go and attend and sometimes participate as well. So I think more or less, yeah, these are the few things that keep me busy.
Quite a few, to be honest. So where can we read your writing? I mean, how do we get hold of some of the things you've written?
So they're both on Amazon right now. I published a book of poems earlier this January, and it's called Let's Borrow Some Light. It's available on Amazon. I published a story like 10, 15 days ago.
Okay.
And both on Amazon, actually, if you go look up my name, hopefully you should find both.
All right, great. We should definitely do that. I'll definitely do that after we finish this session today. All
Sure,
right.
please do let me know what you think. As a writer, we all looking for things that connect with other people.
Absolutely. I've been a literature student myself,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
so I've published my books as well. But I definitely love to read. So my inspiration is
Yes, Zubin.
when I meet people and I know that they write. That's what really excites me. So I'm definitely going to do that.
And you
And
must share about your books too, Zubin. Sorry, I cut in. Please
sorry,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, no. I just
Um,
finished.
oh, I was just saying that you must talk about your books and you must share your names so that I can look up your books as well.
Sure. I think we can do that offline as well.
Absolutely.
All right. So here's the last question of the day, and I keep coming to this question with everyone I interview because of the present situation. So in terms of what we're dealing with right now, what are your views on how to deal with this present situation we are in as a talent management and leadership development professional? What are you doing? What are the steps you're taking? How are you planning things at this point in time?
Sure, Zubin. I think these are times that none of us have ever seen in our lifetime. In fact, generation before me and generation next, so at least three, four generations, and absolutely, it has thrown us, caught us off guard. So most of us are just reacting right now, Zubin, because nobody knows what's going to happen and how this will all pan out, right? So, a lot of learning programs or a lot of learning interventions that we have started are so I haven't done anything which is knee jerk. So I went back to exactly what my vision has been and what are the skills we would like to build. So on lines of these, we have introduced different programs, some e-learning sessions, tied up with Linda, tied up with Edcast, etc. So those programs are in the offering for the leadership team. But I want to go back to say that, I don't want to invest or, do anything which is absolutely just very, very short term. I don't want to run PowerPoint session programs. I don't want to do Excel sheet programs because for me, I don't believe in doing check in the box activity. So even if these are times which we don't know how to respond to, let's go back to what are we building as an organization, what skills, capabilities really will hold the test of time, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the line, and maybe work on those as well. I am ensuring that our business is as usual. We were supposed to do talent reviews, in March end and April, and these were all global talent reviews, and we didn't know what to do. And what we managed to do them on Microsoft Teams. So all the leaders logged in, and we did that Microsoft Teams really fantastically. And I was surprised the effectiveness of it because I would send the material in advance, people would log in at the same time, etc. So I would just say let's be focused on what the organization wants to achieve. Let's not be knee jerk, or let's not take knee jerk reactions or decisions, but really just stay focused on as an organization and ensure that people are engaged, they're motivated. We are not burying them under a series and avalanche of webinars and Zoom calls and programs. So I would say let's also be patient with people. If they're not finishing something in time, let's give them, because I'm sure everybody's struggling just to cope.
Right. Okay, so in fact, I was just going through the questions in the chat box. I would also request everyone if you would like to ask some questions, although we have just about a few minutes left. But let me see if I can take one or two questions. In fact, the questions which have already come in, many of those questions you've already answered in some way or the other. So I don't want to get into all of those questions. One or two I've already asked. Um, so. Uh, Anybody wants to ask a question, please type in the chat box. I think we have time to take maybe one or a maximum of two questions. I think I'll just take one question which is quite broad. if I look at it, comes from
Sure.
Gaurav. Um, so he's talking about what support HR leaders could give for the future. So the second part of his question is what I would like to ask you. He's asking how the future of work would look like uh, post this situation we are facing. So I'm not sure what's the definition of future, but you can take it the way you would want to, Preeti.
Sure, Zubin and Gaurav. I'm sorry, I'm no expert on this, and I can't give any definitive answer because, like I said, all of us are just trying to figure out what does it mean. But from what I can understand, and basis conversations, what I do feel is definitely life should become far more focused on what we want to achieve. It should be the priority should be far sharper rather than just drifting along. Right? HR should partner the business far more effectively because we have realized the role that HR professionals are playing these days, right? And just trying to ensure that people in the plants are safe, people in the R&D labs are safe, people who are coming to office just preparing for, trying to get people back into the work. But more importantly, I think it's just about building the skills, and some of them can be being digital, some of them could be about being far more agile, because if you're not agile, so people who have really coped well are the ones who have learned to manage change really, really well. Yeah. So I think these are the few things that I would think Zubin would be important. And just to recap, learning agility, change agility, risk appetite, ability to just manage in ambiguity when things are not very, very clear. So build these skills and ensure that as HR professionals we can learn to partner with the business far more effectively.
All right, thank you so much, Preeti. This was it was a privilege to be able to speak to you, to learn from you about talent management, about leadership development. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your perspectives. I'm sure all of us learned a lot. So, Preeti, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch and we can have further discussions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zubin. Thank you, everybody. It's been a privilege.